This morning, just for a moment, I want to shine a light on relationships. What does the word family mean? The people closest to us? The people we love? The people who annoy us? Perhaps in various measures we find that there are different levels of family. The family we're born into, sometimes others are adopted into. Our church family, our school family perhaps, if we're of school age, or wear the old school tie. Our national family of Scots, or even British. The worldwide family of human beings. The family of God. That includes those whom we wouldn't normally have much to do with. The homeless, the refugee. I've got a bit of an edgy one-liner for you. What's the difference between the homeless and the refugee? Boom, boom. It's in poor taste, intentionally in poor taste, which perhaps makes the point. It's despicable in this 21st century that anyone ought to be a refugee. Would you agree? Despicable. But whether we're talking about a domestic homeless person or a refugee who's flown from war, or maybe even a domestic refugee as well who's fled from personal conflict, because there are plenty of refugees even in our own shores who've run from domestic violence and other various issues, the net result is just the same. No security, even about where you lay down your head. In Isaiah 61, we read a little earlier there that God loves justice and he hates oppression. What better definition, perhaps, of homelessness in this 21st century Scotland might we possibly give than the thought of the homeless, those sleeping rough? The definition for it these days is anyone really who finds himself sleeping at night on the streets. That seems perhaps quite common to think of for ourselves. The benches, and the bridges, in cars, in sheds. Perhaps their only home is a bed and breakfast or a hostel. Perhaps the reason for this has been caused, as suggested by our moderator this year, Derek Browning, that homelessness is not simply the lack of a roof over your head, it's a symptom which has many root causes. Domestic abuse, relationship breakdown, unemployment, poverty, substance and alcohol addiction, and poor mental health. If we are going to address homelessness, we also need to address these and other issues in our communities, in our country, and in our churches. In our reading in John 1, we heard the words of John the Baptist quoting Isaiah. Make straight the path for the Lord. How do we do that? How do we tackle the injustices of our own time? One example of which is homelessness. Do we pray? Do we simply tell people about Christ? Sure. But if we truly love our neighbour without hypocrisy, our care will also be shown in action. It will also be shown in action. And that's why so many of us, 1,500 from various churches and a wider group of 8,000, got involved in Sleep in the Park last weekend. The temperatures plummeted that night to -6 degrees centigrade. We've had colder since. It's gone down to -12, I'm led to believe, this week. Maybe if you've been slipping and sliding over black ice, and I know some of you have fallen as well, it's not been nice at all. It's been a terrible winter so far already, just from the temperature point of view. But that night was already the coldest night of the year at that point, at -6. And after some entertainment, John Cleese told a bedtime story, and then all of us started to bivvy down for the night. Managed to get some pictures with the moderator and a past moderator as well, who were both there despite their theological differences, because they came from different poles perhaps and various ideas when it comes to theological ideas, but they were there to support this particular cause, that of homelessness. There was Taram laid on the ground throughout Princes Street Garden in Edinburgh there to avoid too much damp coming up from underneath, but it certainly didn't hold back the cold. For myself, I decided rather than trying to sleep on Taram, I managed to find a bench. And that helped a little bit. They say that air insulates a little bit better than water, and maybe even hard ground as well. So I went for a bench, and there were plenty of benches there throughout the grounds. But trying to find sleep when there was so much toing and froing, you can probably imagine, was quite difficult. I probably woke every half an hour or less. I got half an hour sleep at max in a run. And finally woke up cold, stiff, shivering, and gave it up. It was a bad idea trying to sleep, that is, about 5 a.m. I unzipped my sleeping bag and discovered there was ice on top of it. It was bitterly, bitterly cold. Now I have to confess, earlier in that day, hearing about the weather forecast, because it was forecast to have plunging temperatures. It was to be dry, at least, but incredibly cold, sub-zero. I have to confess, there's a huge part of me thought, do I really want to be doing this? I had second thoughts. But I felt I had to go through with it. Why? Because many people in our nation today don't have that choice. They don't have that choice. People sleep on our streets and under benches and in cars and all sorts of various different locations all year round. And if I thought it was cold a week past Saturday night, you better believe that during this week when it's plunged to minus 12, the folks were finding it even more drastic again. And they too are children of God. Perhaps rejected by their own families, finding a variety of rejection within life. Perhaps a consequence of some of their actions, perhaps not. More often than not. But as a consequence of our efforts, of which this congregation contributed towards, somewhere between 3.6 and 4 million pounds were raised for that particular cause. And I think that's something to be very proud about. Wouldn't you agree? The aim is to put that money to good use, to try to eradicate homelessness. But again, as our current moderator suggested, we'll be lucky if it succeeds in doing just that. But if it makes a dent in it, that will be work well done. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus' family was without a home. All they had was the temporary use of a stable. They also, the story continues to tell us, eventually became refugees to Egypt. If we have a secure home, shouldn't we hold our family a little bit tighter? But there are times, even perhaps for us, when we feel a little bit homeless and adrift in the world, in our emotions, in our spirit, even in our relationships. Isn't it good to know that here we have a spiritual home, safe in the arms of Jesus, and with our church family? But even wider than that, let us spend this last week of Advent considering what we anticipate from the birth of Christ in our hearts. Emmanuel, God with us, journeying with us in our homes and even without a home, until we reach our eternal home with him. Amen.